In this video, I'm going to be looking at two games, Everdell and Wingspan, and I think I can recommend which of these two you would like more. I'm going to do that using the perfect board game formula, which breaks games down into 5 attributes. Those attributes are theme, mechanics, luck, strategy, and complexity. Now, the perfect board game formula can help you compare games like these. It can help you identify games that you like the most, and it can help you identify the right kind of game for the right kind of mood. If you'd like to learn more about that, you can check out the site, theperfectboardgame.com. However, I'm going to jump right into comparing these two games, and I'm not going to do an overview of the rules because as I go through these attributes, I think the relevant aspects of the games will come out. So the very first thing you'll notice about both of these games is they have very impressive components. Everdell with its Evertree and like the very seemingly realistic berries and the twigs, and then Wingspan with its dice tower, the beautiful artwork on the cards and the eggs, and like it's very colorful, just amazing amount of unique artwork on every individual card. But components don't influence whether or not the game is good. In fact, they're often confused with the very first attribute, which is theme. Theme, like components, is what the game represents. In Everdell, you are animals that are building a city, and in Wingspan, you are a bird watcher who's collecting information about birds. But really, when it comes to the theme rating, it's when you play the game, does the actual gameplay represent something meaningful or analogous to a real-life situation? Is there something about this game that really makes you feel like you're building a city with animals, or does it really feel like you're collecting birds? That question for both of these games can be answered with a big no. Both of these games score very low in the theme rating despite having fantastic artwork. And let me tell you a little bit about why. If we look first at Everdell, everything thematic is completely superficial. It has nothing to do with animals if you look at how the game is played. Gameplay is largely buying cards that will enable you to buy more cards and collect resources that will allow you to buy more cards and more expensive cards that are worth points, but none of that really has any meaning. If you've ever played a game called Dominion, which is a really big game that came out several years ago, but really well-known game, it's kind of like that in the sense that it feels very much like the cards are mostly meaningless, and then they kind of like tacked on like, oh, well, we'll call this one farm because it gives you food, and we'll call this one like woodcutter because it gives you wood, but like a chipmunk, chip sweep, it's just artwork. It's just artwork that's slapped on there. So for its theme rating, Everdell is really a 1, and I would only give it a 1 because at least it has a theme. The lowest rating is a 0, and 0 is like checkers. So not impressed by the implementation of the theme at all. If we look at Wingspan by comparison, it's a lot better, but it's still not very impressive. Now, what makes it better? Well, right off the bat, you're looking at the cards. The cards have numerous facts about the animals that you're reading. It talks about what continents they live in, how large their wingspan is, interesting information. And then what I find really interesting is the information about the nests that they have, and the number of eggs that they lay is proportionate to how many eggs they lay in real life. It says that in the rule book. Also, they have environment and a food that's representative of their actual diets in reality, which is great. You've got 3 environments here. You've got dice that will help you, gather food to feed your birds. And all of that stuff is thematically very strong. But the gameplay, what are you doing? Again, you're collecting cards, which you're playing on a board in order to have more powerful actions so that you can collect more cards, and the cards are worth points and they help you meet objectives. It's basically the same type of gameplay. Nothing about what you actually do, aside from where you place it, is something that you go on like, oh wow, this is like a real bird watcher. I bet this is done in real life. Like, I don't know. It doesn't represent anything. So I think that it's a lot better. A lot more effort has gone into making a stronger theme, but the gameplay, it falls short. For theme, I would give it a 2 or maybe even a 3, but not much higher than that. So now let's talk about mechanics. The mechanics rating is how ingenious is the gameplay and how memorable are the rules? Both of these games are really solidly average. They're both card drafting games. Here you're drafting from a set of birds. You've always got 3 that you can look at, and you're placing them in different rows. Each row is associated with an action. So there's a little bit of a placement factor over here. In this game, where you place the buildings doesn't matter. You're just collecting 15. You can put them in a row, you can put them in column, whatever. The placement is your workers. So you're placing a worker over here to take that action, and you're getting resources, much like Wingspan, you're getting resources to pay the cost to draft the card and put it into your city. And each card is either going to give you more resources or help you get more cards. So both of them don't do anything very innovative, which puts them in a pretty average score. However, there is something really clumsy about Everdell, something that I really don't like. In Everdell, each round you have spring, summer, and autumn. You're taking another worker. So you start with 2, you take your 3rd one, in the next round you take your 4th one, and then in the last round you take your 5th and 6th one. So you're placing more workers as the game goes on. The game actually starts to drag on and feels like it's getting longer. One of the things that the game designers did is they even made it so that the game is played at a different pace for every single player, and it's very possible that after everyone is done, somebody is still taking turns. Now, I like thoughtful games, and I like it where I really have to consider the best use of my workers, but to have the game drag on is not very appealing, and I think that is not serving its mechanics score very well. If we look at Wingspan by comparison, in Wingspan, at the end of every round, you're taking one of your action cubes and you're placing it on a scoring sheet. So every round, you actually have less and less moves, but each move has become more powerful based on how you've played in your rows. So the game actually feels like it's getting faster. And this is really attractive to me. So when it comes to mechanics, while they're both kind of average, this one is a solid 5. And this one I think is a little bit better because it takes classic mechanics and just add something to make it more interesting with that like accelerated gameplay. So I give it a 6 or a 7 for Wingspan. Moving on to the next attribute is luck. To know a little bit more about the luck score, here's the thing with luck. I put a 7 right at the place where an inexperienced player can beat an experienced player based solely on luck. Now in both games, it's card drafting, so you get to look at several face-up cards, but technically speaking, in Everdell, you can look at 7 cards that are face-up at any time, 8 cards that are face-up, and in Wingspan, you can look at 3. And in Wingspan, there's also dice, and the roll of dice is going to determine what kinds of resources you can get in the first place. So while in both games, you spend time, waiting for the lucky card to come up, in Wingspan, there's a lot more waiting and hoping because there isn't so much exposed. And then the dice, you can be holding on to the best card, but because it requires a fish or because it requires a mouse, and if you look at the dice, there's only 1 fish and there's 1 mouse on here, a lot more luck involved in Wingspan. So for Wingspan, luck, a 7, whereas in Everdell, luck is about a 5 or maybe a 6. I think in Everdell, an experienced player can always beat an inexperienced player, even if they have bad luck. But in Wingspan, almost anybody can play this and do well. There's so much luck involved, almost anybody could win. The next category is strategy. So strategy has to do with how much planning ahead and how many factors you have to consider when making your move. And strategy and luck kind of affect each other. Usually when there's more luck, there's less predictability and you can't plan ahead, which gives you a lower strategy score. And in games where there's less luck, you can usually plan more. Both games have high luck scores, so it's really hard to say that they could have a high strategy score. However, because there are more cards exposed, you can see more plans, and you can actually pay closer attention to what other players are doing when you play Everdell. Whereas in Everdell, there are objectives as well, but everyone is competing for those objectives every single round. And unfortunately, if somebody draws the right card that plays into the objective, they're going to probably win the objective or perform better than other players, and there's nothing you can do about it because of luck. So less foresight involved in this game, lower strategy score. I would say for strategy, it's about a 4 or a 5, whereas Everdell, strategy is more like a 7. Last category is complexity. So usually with complexity, a 4 means that a child who can't read very well would not be able to play the game. Or it's right on the boundary where like a 6, 7, 8-year-old can play a game, and usually that's because reading interferes with it. Both of these games involve a lot of reading, and there's a lot of abstraction there because every single card does a different thing. You can't explain that. You have to read every single card to understand what it does and how it plays off of other cards. So already you cannot have a lower score than a 4 or 5. You can't have a lower score than a 5 on these games because of how much longer Everdell is, and because the text on these cards is a little bit more complicated, and the relationship between the cards is more complicated, and because of the lack of a theme, it's not very intuitive. So Everdell really has a much higher complexity than Wingspan. Wingspan still has a lot of text on cards, but largely the effects of cards are the same. All of the predators, they all kind of say the same thing. They all basically get points for consuming birds with a smaller wingspan. And so even though there might be, gosh, I don't know how many of each card, 50, let's say 50 predators in the whole deck, they're all basically the same. You don't have repetition in the cards over here at Everdell. So with Wingspan, a 5 for complexity. With Everdell, probably a 7 for complexity. So hopefully that'll help you decide which of these games you prefer more. I will now tell you my personal preference. So when I buy games, I'm always considering two things. I'm looking for the games that I like, and I'm looking for the games that my family likes. Personally, I would rather play Everdell because I like games that are very thoughtful. I like games that involve a lot of strategy, and I do not like luck. So I would play this over Wingspan all the time. However, because of how much more drawn out this is, my family would prefer to play Wingspan, and I would prefer to play a game that other people will play with me. So I would own Wingspan if I was planning on a game that more of my family would get in on and enjoy playing. So that's my recommendation. If you'd like to look at more comparisons and more scores using the Perfect Board Game formula, go ahead and check out theperfectboardgame.com. And to have more recommendations, don't forget to subscribe to my channel, Board Game Dad. Thank you so much for watching. Take care and bye-bye.